politicians did concern themselves a little bit about waning legitimacy because they went, why aren't you all voting? Come to the polls, participate, people. I feel like I'm talking to a void here. And then people started doing it and doing it in the wrong way. And they're like, don't do that. And now I think we're past that, as Lee has pointed out in an article he's written. We're beyond knobs. We're beyond neoliberal order breakdown syndrome. They're kind of okay with ballot box revolts because it leads to Maloney, and what's Maloney going to do, etc.
I think the question is who's they? So liberal elites, I think, are not really okay with ballot box revolts. They're still worried about it. When I say the ruling class is not trolled by it, I mean capital. Capital can deal with that. They can deal with the Maloney. They can deal with even deal with a Trump, right? They're not that bothered by that. So they don't. And if they were so bothered by it, they would stop being so fragmented, short-termist, and not offering the working class anything. They would try to come up with a new legitimation project. They don't do it. And I think that's why there is a hole at the heart of Muskism, is that it's just not seen as socially and politically necessary to legitimate capitalism in the way that it was in the wake of 2 world wars and in the presence of a systemic alternative to capitalism.
Indeed. Well, you've gone from mass society to post-mass society to post-human society. At least that's what Muskism
post-human, post-society.
Well, indeed, it's... Yeah.
Then we're going to be post-human, post-society. And then we're going to be post that. Oh my God, it's going to be a lot of posts.
I feel like that you didn't really score a goal there with that comment. You very much hit the post.
I think we should move post this discussion.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga, Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Gustavia, on fait le bunga, bunga.
Hello everyone, welcome back. This is BungaCast, the global politics podcast at the end of history, and specifically this is the letters to the editors episode where we try to synthesize what we've done over the past month, respond to your comments, have a little bit of a discussion, and look forward to what's coming up next. There's lots of stuff happening in the world, you may have noticed, and we're going to try to tie into that. Hello, George, and hello, Lee.
Hi. Where are you coming from? Normally you say, I'm Alex Wahuli from Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Yeah. So I can't, because I'm in some other place. I can't.
It's mysterious.
In a mountain lair.
Ooh.
Yes. So I'm not going to repeat the central questions and themes for the year because I think I've said that enough. I'll do it one more time. State capitalism, the pre-political, militarism and war, irrationalism and unfreedom, and political recombination. Now, the themes that we've got, or rather the episodes we've got coming up in April, which I'm about to tell you about, touch on a lot of these as well. Again, this is meant to be the spine of the thing that we do, and these are the ribs that branch off the spine. Yeah, does that work?
Yeah.
Lee was correcting me earlier because I know nothing about medicine, and I was saying the wrong thing about antibodies, so I don't even know if I know my skeleton.
Lee also, I mean, anybody who suffers from hay fever, Lee, have you heard of these antihistamines that Lee just told me about? Apparently you can take them and they will make the symptoms of your hay fever less bad. So, we really do have a medical expert.
So the histamines are the bad guys.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, you can apparently get them from bad beer. And then you feel bad if you drink a lot of beer.
Yeah,
apparently that's what you feel bad if you drink a lot of beer. I don't know.
It's the
never happened to me.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Just to be clear, this is not medical advice.
Dr. Lee Jones, yeah. Should have not a real doctor,
not a useful doctor.
Yeah. Well, I've been watching The Pit. You're watching The Pit, HBO's The Pit. It's kind of like a bit liberal progressive, but I can tolerate it. It's not woke. The doctor is very, but he's just done this, I don't know, for Saturday Night Live or some other sketch where he gives a whole ream of bad medical advice because he's a TV doctor, even though he's not a real doctor, as a way of kind of critiquing the CDC and RFK. Anyway,
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, Saturday Night Live has now come to the UK, so we
so
are
bad.
demoralized, defeated. We are like an occupied country now,
That's
where
where satire goes to die.
people have given up in this country. You can see it in their eyes as they're just like walking to work, and they're just defeated because we now have Saturday Night Live.
You don't even produce your own. You don't produce anything. You don't even produce your own comedy anymore, which Britain used to be good at.
It's nothing to
Used to
laugh
do
at.
Splitting Image.
Anyway, so what's coming up? Obviously, Iran. We have an episode on that. Whatever else happens, and many different things can happen with the Iran war. I think that a lot of the long-term consequences can already be drawn out, and that's what we'll try to do. Just to give you an example, there's the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and the sellers' inflation that has ensued from that, which is a concept which a former guest of the podcast, Isabella Weber, conceived of actually, I think, in relation to the inflation that followed the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it's been discussed a lot recently. We'll maybe get her on again later in the year. We're going to discuss her piece. We also have obviously the impact on oil and gas, on the energy transition, on fertilizers, and the food crisis that might emerge from that. Israel's redrawing of the map of the Middle East very successfully, if horribly, in the past 2 years, but has it overreached now? We have obviously the questions internal to Iran and indeed on Trump. And I think a lot of the things we can already start to make some claims and have discussions about, even if we don't know how this war will actually play out. We also have an episode called Inversion with Ryan Heilbrunn, which will come out shortly. Lee, why don't you give us a preview?
Yeah, this connects with the theme of the pre-political, and I suppose we're asking, is sexual desire really something that can be politicized and subject to political correctness? Or should we reject the idea that the personal is political and push politics out of the bedroom, at least, as a precondition for doing better politics outside of the bedroom?
So, like, can you put a little white pointed hat on your penis and pretend it's a Ku Klux Klan penis?
Look, we don't want to know what you do in the privacy of your own
that was just
bedroom,
an example. I mean, there's other
just a random
other
example
examples.
plucked out of
Hypothetical.
nowhere. Yeah.
You could do there's other things that you can do. We also have an episode on post-legitimacy. Now, this is an issue and a discussion that arose in the episode on Muskism, which was very popular, and we'll come to your comments on that in a second. But whether Muskism has to kind of justify itself to people, does it have to sell something, or is it just about kind of domination and profiteering? That issue is something we're going to discuss with a scholar called Will Charles, who studies organizations and gig work, and looking at the way in which some of these platforms rely on, kind of legitimating themselves, some form of consent or not at all. So I'm quite interested to hear what he has to say on that. In the Reading Club, we will be discussing post-liberalism and its failures. So in February, we discussed illiberalism, and this month we're going to be discussing pieces by John Gray and Alistair McIntyre. And joining us to do that will be Jeff Schellenberger, who I know you all like to listen to when he's on. So I'll be happy to have him on again. And then finally, a big episode of the month is Dylan Riley will be back on to discuss political capitalism, which of course is a different way of conceiving some of the tendencies towards state capitalism. The massive upwards redistribution of wealth through the state. This is also discussed in terms of techno-feudalism, which is another conception of the similar phenomenon. So we're going to be discussing that with Dylan Riley, as well as many of the themes that arise from his really brilliant short articles that appear in Sidecar every couple of months, such as whether the working class is a force for radicalism or for conservatism, what civil society actually is, and more. So I'm very much looking forward to doing that this month. Okay. We're firstly going to deal with the letters to the editor from last episode, or rather the responses to that. So firstly, JK.
Sorry, can you clarify what
it's letters to the editor, letters to the editor.
Yeah, I hope
that's
a bit
clear.
It's a bit meta. Look, it's post-modernity. Get used to it. It's been around for a while now. JK. in response to that episode, says that, well, let me try to recap that, because I made an argument to George that there is an inconsistency and a contradiction both on left and right. People who are okay with, for example, crackdowns on COVID, but not okay with immigration crackdowns, and vice versa, right? And, if you're going to be libertarian, be concerned with freedom, you need to do that in both ways. George said, no, it's different because one is a crackdown on non-citizens and one's a crackdown on citizens. We discussed that. I personally disagreed. I think Lee made an argument that, the state, the way the state treats immigrants is the way the state would treat you, citizen, if only it had the chance. So JK says, well, Lee put my point fairly well. With that said, I think George is ultimately avoiding the contradictory treatment he has with regard to immigration and COVID. As he has suggested, he thinks the ICE crackdown is legitimate because it has popular support among the citizenry, or at least it did. A position he won't hold with regard to COVID policies, which, if elections and polling were to be trusted, did have majoritarian support from the citizenry. It strikes me George has a classic case of wanting to have his cake and eat it too. It is indeed critical to note that the precise issue I have with George's take here is that he selects when to listen to the citizenry, to the citizenry's wants, precisely when it corresponds with his priors, and selects to ignore it precisely when it runs counter to his desires. What is important here is that George is not using the popular will as an equally valid justification for both. This is my point. In one case he ignores it and says it's wrong, in the other he validates it. George.
Yeah, I think we just disagree, JK, and I think the major difference between, and I didn't say that the ICE crackdown is necessarily legitimate. I said that a state citizens can decide how they want to treat immigrants. That is a basic democratic point. The COVID lockdowns were emergency politics. This is precisely designed to short circuit any mechanisms of representation and cannot be, in my opinion, justified by the popular will. So I mean that's the major difference. But I do take seriously like what I think is the thrust, if you will, of JK's point, which is that you have to be consistent. You have to, and I think, and this is part of the discussion that we had before. And I would like to try to be as consistent as possible in being democratic and saying that there are things that I might not agree with, but if they're voted on, if parties campaign on them and get the most votes, then yep, I won't necessarily like it, but I'll have to go along with it, sort of thing. I don't think that is the case with COVID. However, if we had a COVID party in the next election, which said if there's going to be another COVID pandemic, we'll do X, Y, Z, and they got a landslide majority, then yeah, I would be neither having my cake nor eating it. I would have to kind of suck it up, and that would be very much not what I would like to do.
But I would suck up a cake and probably choke.
That's called a milkshake, I think, or a McFlurry, maybe. No, but I do. I think I was. I remember in the last episode trying, and I was being genuine. I made the point. Sometimes people disagree with me, and I literally don't understand what they are saying, and that made me sound like a bit of an asshole. I would probably imagine. But yeah, so thank you, JK. Maybe a J on the end as well for continuing that. But I think it's a question of what points at which popular will can be used and when it can't. Anyway.
Cardboard says, I think in response to a comment that I made about authority relations and how the 1960s revolt was against daddy. And I said, this notion that daddy is always strong, so you can just throw anything at the authorities, but that ignores the transformation in kind of authority relations, and the daddy isn't there anymore. Cardboard comments, as a former zealot, the subculture of social justice politics seemed just to be about challenging and overturning, like you've described the long 1960s. Learning and discussing moralism constantly doesn't leave open any space to discuss leverage, strategy, or how to react to the way society currently exists. They can't do politics. Their only mode is that of the truth-telling activist. Yeah, indeed. Kind of reveal the truth about, whatever. Yeah.
Quite interested in this comment as a former zealot. I'd just be interested if Cardboard would comment on this episode and tell us more about their transition from being a zealot into somebody who's more interested in leverage strategy and the way society currently exists. So I'm genuinely interested to know what's the pathway out of radicalization into a different form of radicalization, right?
Isn't that just maturity? Because I mean, I guess, we were all
It's a bit
zealots.
patronizing to say it's about growing up. There's plenty of people that are not doing it. So I'm quite interested to know what influences was this person exposed to? How did they change their thinking? I'm genuinely interested.
Write a full autobiography, please, Cardboard. No, isn't there this story about Marx meeting some old comrade and the old comrade saying, "Oh, we all get more conservative as we get older, don't we?" And Marx was like, "No, I don't." And I don't think I do. I think I'm becoming maybe crankier.
Definitely crankier.
Maybe wiser, but maybe just crankier.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Just older, less hair.
I think you reach a kind of asymptotic point where it doesn't really matter anymore.
Asymptotic?
Yeah, like approaching a...
That is $100 word.
Yeah, that's one of the first airings for asymptotic. No, George, you're always the one who's like, "Ooh, big fancy word. I'm just a simple man who knows no big words."
With my DPhil in political theory from the University of Oxford.
I just couldn't think of a synonym quickly enough.
Speaking of words, congratulations on getting thrust in there. So the listeners that are playing Bunga Bingo at home will be delighted.
Oh, has that already been? I missed it. Did I say it?
George said it. The thrust of JK's comment.
Right.
The spirit of Phil lives on.
Let's try to keep that in a box, a cardboard box. Anyway, James says, I was interested / disappointed to hear the invocation of the idea that the purpose of the Second Amendment is to prevent the state from exercising excessive force or brutalizing its citizens. This is a point that I think George aired on that episode. James says, this is a common misconception. It's best disposed of here. There's a link. I'll try to include that in the show notes. Start of the paragraph that begins, only fantasists can think the self-styled militias of our day are acting under the mandate of, or even in accord with, the Second Amendment. This is a great piece of which more people should be aware.
I thought this was aimed at me, actually. I can't remember who said it, but I did go away and read the piece, and I thought it was very interesting. So it's a piece from the 90s, I think. So it's addressed to the spate of, far-right militias, survivalist groups that were then at play in the United States. And it's basically a critique of interpretation of the Second Amendment that think that it's about empowering individuals or these independent militias to own guns. And it's quite a detailed textual analysis of the amendment to say that is not what the the framers of the Constitution wanted. It was all about establishing well-governed militias that the state could mobilize in its defense, not empowering militias that might rise up against the government. So the argument is that basically this is a mistaken view. NRA and its supporters have kind of pushed this idea that it was all about, retaining your weapons as individuals so that you can rise up against state tyrannies. That is not what the Constitution was about. Now, I am no expert on the history or the politics of the American Constitution, but I genuinely thought it was interesting. I would encourage others to have a look.
Listeners should also go and check out, if they haven't heard it already, episode 495 with James Pogue, because his book from 2019, I think, Chosen Country, is basically, this is the armed occupation of the Oregon National Park in 2016. And there's some interesting, I think it's a kind of subculture or a part, no, that's not the right way to put it. It's a part of American culture that I find fascinating that I probably should do some more reading on. So I will start with this piece that James links to. So thanks.
Yeah, no, you can only have weapons if you're going to kill British who might return. So it's not to rise up against the government.
Which you are British.
Huh?
Can you have, if you're British, can you have weapons to kill other British people? Okay.
No. So in response to the reading club on illiberalism. So now this was back in February, but because Lee Jones is on now, we offer him the opportunity to respond to a comment which is, I think, mostly directed at him. Now, to remind you, if you're not a member of the reading club, firstly, you should sign up. There's great stuff on there, which is a reading all done along the themes, the 5 big themes that we're exploring this year. So do join us for that. But specifically, the episode on illiberalism was a way of Marlène Laruelle, the author of it, proposes illiberalism as a way to understand those who have passed through liberalism and come out the other side resentful of it. And, so that would apply, obviously, to a Viktor Orban, various kind of post-liberals, etc. Many kind of European populists would be classed as illiberals. And we discussed whether it's a useful term or not. Anyway, Noah Cole says, if I've understood Lee's point about the difference between radical conservatism and the far right correctly, it's that the former want to enact the popular will in a democratic framework, which elite-controlled liberalism doesn't do, while the latter, that is the far right, want to do away with democracy altogether and have direct authoritarian rule. Then Lee assigns Trump to the radical conservatism camp. Now, isn't that rather credulous as to the Trumpist project? And doesn't it disregard the fact that authoritarians and fascists have always claimed to be enacting the true will of the people, which democracy could never get at, only a true leader figure?
Well, I don't want to rehearse the whole "is it fascism" debate here, which we've talked about on the podcast before, but I'm being pushed into doing so. So this is my view.
It doesn't need to be fascism; it's far right, right? There's other versions of far right that are not fascism.
Okay, although I think when people say far right, they use it as a synonym for fascism. But my view is that fascists were explicitly anti-democratic, right? So as soon as they came to power, as soon as they could, they formally abolished the institutions of representative democracy. The contemporary radical right exists in a post-democratic space, in a space where democratic institutions have been hollowed out. In a sense, fascism of the 1920s, 1930s is responding to what the forces of order would have called an excess of democracy, right? Is the masses mobilizing into society, influencing things in the wrong ways, the rise of communism, the strength of the organized left. Now we're in the wake of all that, right? The ruins of 20th century representative democracy. And so they come at it, the contemporary radical right consequently has quite a different diagnosis and quite a different political approach. Their argument is not that democracy is bad and should be abolished. It's that democracy has been subverted by liberal globalist elites. And so the solution is democratization. So it's more democracy, not less. And that's why, to have Kamala Harris running in the last election in the United States on the grounds of defense of democracy was so problematic, because effectively you're positioning yourself as a defender of a system that large numbers of people, including many that vote Democrat, see as undemocratic, rightly so, because for the reasons that we always talk about on this podcast, the voiding of representative democracy. So the result of that is that the radical right are more minded to chip away at the liberal and globalist elements of constitutional orders rather than the democratic bits. But I think it's very difficult to separate the two in practice. If you attack liberal institutions like rule of law, the free press and so on, the space for democratic contestation actually narrows. So this is the extent to which they're not necessarily pursuing a principled agenda. We've had this discussion when we talk about J.D. Vance and free speech, right? I took a different view on this. I didn't take that seriously. I think they're doing that for purely instrumental reasons. But I do think it's very significant politically because of the way that they're coming at this. It has big political consequences. The basic institutions of democracy have not been abolished. They remain intact. Trump is not going to become president for life. He's not even going to run for a third term. He is going to have to face the midterm elections, and he may well lose control of Congress. And those institutions, they're degraded, they're hollowed out, the institutions of representative democracy, but they do create space for people to mobilize alternatives. Right? We're not seeing communists rounded up and sent into concentration camps. So this is not to say that we take a credulous approach to the analysis of the radical right, or they don't do anything that can be conceived as being anti-democratic, like the current efforts to suppress voter turnout in the United States, for example, in the guise of defending the integrity of elections. But I still insist on the point that we have to distinguish between the contemporary radical conservatives and what they're about, what they're doing, what the implications of that, and the classical far right / fascism.
I agree with that broadly, but just one element, the critique, the far right critique of democracy, I think it's kind of twofold, because there was the democracy is too strong, right? There's an excess of democracy, but there's also the democracy is too weak, right? The pusillanimous Weimar Republic, etc. All these kind of people in suits chitter-chattering in parliaments. We need action, right? Which was also the fascist critique of democracy, and indeed it was also a communist one as well in different forms. So that critique, democracy is too weak, I think is also found with the contemporary radical conservatives, the radical right, and not just the far right, right? There's this idea of muscularity. You just have to watch Pete Hegseth's ridiculous performances to see how that plays out. Like, what is missing is just fucking doing stuff, right? Just fucking do it and stop concerned about the rules and the right way of doing things. Trump can rule through executive order, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there is a quite directly anti-democratic element to the radical right.
No, this is what I mean about it's anti-liberal rather than anti-democratic, right? Because what's the weakness? Okay, there's two different things going on. I think you've got, the feminists must be having a field day here when they watch that idiot Pete Hegseth strutting around, and it's about a kind of martial masculinity, a ridiculous machismo. That's the weakness. It's like the state's become woke and feminized. That's part of the critique. The more telling critique is the one that it's weak in the sense that it's not channeling the popular will. So they see these things as kind of going together. But the point that the state is not effectively channeling the popular will that's the true part of their analysis, right? Not that they are any better at bringing it about or changing the situation, because they're very weak in rebuilding bonds of representation. But the bits that they're trying to chisel away at are both of those things. And I think it's not, in that sense, it's not the same as saying democracy is weak. It's to say the liberal institutions, it's the judges, it's the technocrats, it's the deep state, it's the environmental regulations, it's all that kind of stuff that's been larded on. And what we want is you vote for Trump and Trump comes in and fixes everything. This idea of a kind of a savior version of democracy, unencumbered by the liberal constraints on democratic expression of will.
Well, yeah, though that is rather personalistic and demagogic.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem with it, obviously. And this is why populism, as a reaction to post-democracy, doesn't solve the problems of post-democracy. It flourishes in the void. It doesn't close the void, because it's a complete fantasy to think that one person can come in and solve the problems that arise from the dearth of representative democracy. It just reproduces Indeed. The same kinds of problems.
Hello friend, you've reached the end of the free part of the episode. While we put out 2 entirely free episodes a month, the rest is for subscribers. For access, please join us at patreon.com/bungacast. For $7 a month, subscribers receive episodes with the entirety of the Bungacast cast. That's George Hoare, myself Alex Hochuli, and our contributing editors Philip Cunliffe, Lee Jones, Amberly Frost, Catherine Liu, Alex Gurevich, Ryan Zikraff, and Lee Phillips, as well as a huge number of guests. In 2026, our priorities are to explore the following themes: emerging state capitalism, war and militarism, political recombinations and new revolts, irrationalism and unfreedom and how to challenge these ideas, and the pre-political, or the social bases on which politics may be built. We'll also be exploring these themes through the Bungacast Reading Club, through a selection of classic essays, book chapters, films, and academic articles. If you sense history accelerating but feel that we have no control over events, then join us as we try to find political clarity to move beyond the decadent age of Bunga Bunga.